Hello, welcome to the second episode of our special festive Beyond the Ice podcast. I'm Nadia Frontier, a marine biologist here at the British Antarctic Survey in Cambridge. I've spent the last 2.5 years in Antarctica and I've wintered twice at Rothera Research Station. In these podcasts, we want to give you an insight into what it's like to live and work in Antarctica, particularly at this time of year. With me for our second conversation, I'm joined here in Cambridge by geochemist Dr. Jo Johnson, and from our new research ship, the Sir David Attenborough, in the Weddell Sea, Captain Matt Neill. We're recording this podcast in mid-December, but Matt, whereabouts are you right now? What's your view out of the window?
I am in the northern Weddell Sea, surrounded by ice. I can't see any whales at the minute, but there were lots of whales earlier and a few emperor penguins. So it's quite a nice view.
And you're really close to that giant iceberg. Are you still within the vicinity of the largest iceberg in the world?
That's right. We're working about 60 miles from that at the minute. So can't quite see it on the horizon, but yeah, not far away from it.
Are any penguins making home on that giant iceberg?
I actually saw, we got into a little bit and saw some on one of the low parts of it. So yes, and a whole pod of orca as well were in around the ship whenever we were close to it.
I've seen the BBC News articles. What was it like to come face to face with the largest iceberg in the world?
It was amazing. Yeah, we almost didn't see it because of the fog. We couldn't see it at half a mile, still couldn't see it. So we got a bit closer and then suddenly the fog lifted and we got to go around about half of it for most of the day. So it was good, really amazing.
What kind of hazards do you have to consider when navigating such a large iceberg? I can imagine there's such a huge foot that extends from beyond the iceberg itself. Yeah,
so stability of icebergs, as you know at Rothera, they tend to capsize or bits fall off them. So that's what we're looking for. Something that big, if it starts moving, really could endanger the ship. And you could think the whole thing flips over and squishes us. So we'd try to avoid that from happening.
Yeah. How long would it take the ship to move, theoretically, if a massive chunk of iceberg was to break? What's your reaction time?
I have the con when we're navigating close to iceberg, so I would just throw the sticks down and move away as absolutely quick as possible, so a few minutes.
And then, Jo, we've got a very drizzly, grey day in comparison in Cambridge.
I know, I miss Antarctica. It's just the light there is so bright and so clear somehow, even on a bad day. So here it's a bit gloomy, yeah.
How do you feel about not going south this season? Do you miss it?
Yes and no. I mean, I always think, well, that's less work to do then, in a sense. Don't need to miss my family and so on. But no, I miss that. It's very special. It's incredibly, isolated, untouched by humans, really, and so I do miss it. It almost feels like a dream. I kind of wonder if I've actually really been there sometimes.
I know what you mean.
I've been 7 times, so but it still feels like that.
Matt, you're working on the Sir David Attenborough. That's a new research ship, and I remember at Rothera last year it came for the first time sailing south. It was the maiden voyage, but the purpose was only to refuel research stations. Now this year you're doing science. What's it like to partake in a national treasure almost in terms of the Sir David Attenborough and conduct these science projects?
It's a lot of work, but it's amazing. I moved to the project when the ship was still just cut steel in the yard and seen it the whole way through to now. You know, she's fully operational and doing science and doing new science as well. We were doing some deep bottom work at the start of the year, deepest ever done. And communications is amazing. Now we've got satellite-based internet. So we can video call, which is really good. We can get data back and forward from Cambridge, really good, supporting science. It just makes everything so much easier.
And Jo, you're a regular in Antarctica, but not this season. You're not going to Antarctica. Could you give me a bit of a background about what your involvement is in Antarctic research?
Yes, I'm a geologist. I've been to Antarctica 7 times. And I've actually spent more or less a year of my life down there, which is, not as much as you, though, Nadia.
I think it's still quite a commitment if you're doing
still quite a bit.
Doing it on and off.
So I've been working for British Antarctic Survey for the last 21 years. And so I guess most of the time when I go down, I spend quite a lot of time in a tent in a remote place, usually with just one other person or maybe just 4 people at most. Effectively kind of running around, looking at all the rocks and usually getting quite excited as well. Been to a few places that no one's ever been before, as far as I know. And often going back to places that haven't been visited for sort of 50, 60 years and just trying to imagine, nothing's happened in that time in terms of sort of the rock sitting there, but so much has moved on, in society and our lives.
You're an explorer. You have that sensation of
Yeah.
being able to see these new places. Have you got a particular place that sticks in your memory which you really enjoyed?
Every time I've been has been amazing in its own way, and I think all of the times have been quite different. But I have done a lot of work in the Amundsen Sea embayment, where there's some really massive glaciers, Thwaites and Pine Island. They've been in the news quite a bit recently. It's pretty special working there. It's such a remote area, like thousands of miles from both the British research stations and the US ones as well. So it's really, really remote. On one of the earlier expeditions to get in there, which is actually on a ship, a German ship called Polar Stern. That's in 2006. So that was, it's kind of cool being one of the early people in there, if you like.
Early pioneering researcher and a woman as well, a woman doing field work in Antarctica. That is something that I guess has become more and more common, but definitely was not the case. Women have only wintered at research stations in the last couple of decades as well. So that's really special. And how do you get input to these remote places? You say you're hundreds of miles away from the research stations. How do you get there?
Well, it depends, where exactly you're trying to go. But usually, we get down to Antarctica on a ship, and then we would get from the research station into our field site, usually using small aircraft called Twin Otters, which actually land on skis. So they can go almost anywhere in Antarctica as long as there's a sort of flattish bit for them to land on. I have also worked off ships using helicopters, so that's a bit different, pretty exciting.
Matt, do you get to visit the research stations at all, or is it really this sense of isolation? You're a ship in the middle of the Southern Ocean, surrounded by icebergs. How does it feel?
Yeah, so the good thing about working on the ship is we get that side of it, the isolation and Southern Ocean, icebergs, as you said. But we also take people and stuff around all the research stations. And we do a lot of beach landings for, environmental surveys or scientific work, or picking up field parties that have maybe been in the field for a long time with not a lot of facilities, and then suddenly we can give them all our facilities on board, fresh food, now good internet as well. So it's nice to be able to be welcomed everywhere, because we normally have everyone's cargo that people have been waiting for.
So actually, does it feel quite sociable, considering that you are in Antarctica, in one of the most isolated places in the world? Do you actually get that sense where there's almost a community?
Yeah, certainly. And you're working on board the ship. It's like being at Rotherham in winter. Everyone has to pull their own weight and look after each other. You live and work together in a relatively small space, so everyone has to get on at times. Not always, but it's excellent from that point of view.
I think it's absolutely exciting when the ship comes in, especially after a winter. So that could be a period of up to 6 months where there's been no delivery of fresh fruit or veg or post. And yes, we do have internet and we are able to contact our families, but having the ship call, and we have this human chain of, you could have 100 people taking boxes and apples and whatever off the ship, and then an army of people are peeling everything possible in the kitchen. It is so exciting. So it must be really cool to be able to deliver that to the stations. I think you've got a really, really cool job. How did you get into working at sea? What's your background?
I grew up in a sort of seafaring family. Grandparents were in the Merchant Navy, and I grew up on the north coast of Northern Ireland. So sailing and kayaking and swimming and surfing my whole childhood. Went to university in Plymouth as part of the Merchant Navy cadetship program. So you spend 12 months working on a ship. And I was fortunate enough that I spent 8 of those months on the Ernest Shackleton, one of the previous Bass ships. So I did the full round trip from UK to UK, full season. And then once I qualified, there was a job came up and I got it. And I've been here ever since. So I worked up from the ranks, from cadet, third officer, second officer, chief officer, now up to captain.
How's the Sir David Attenborough compared to Shackleton in terms of the level of comfort?
It's level of comfort is unbelievable. It's like twice the size of the Shackleton. Just everything is bigger. Even when we're full on board, 90 people, you would barely know it. There's just so much space on board. We've got 11 labs for a start. So when the scientists are on board, they're all getting lost and find it difficult to communicate with each other. So we use WhatsApp to try and keep people up to date, because the ship's so big, so it's hard to try and keep people apprised of what's happening. We thought a lot about it when we were designing the ship, but how to make it comfortable for a lot of people for a long period of time, maybe 60 days away at sea. The little Shackleton was if anyone sailed on it before, know how terrible it was in a big seaway. Really, really, really bad little ship. She was great for breaking through ice, but not very good in the sea. Whereas this ship, Sir David Attenborough, is brilliant at sea in comparison. Not a lot of movement, so people can work for longer. We can work in bigger sea as well, keep the science going.
Yeah, so in contrast to having a massive atmosphere of people on the ship, Joe, what's it like when you're in the field and you've got such a small team in a remote area and you're living in a tent? That's very intense.
Yeah, and really there is no way out, You are relying on one other person potentially, for your survival actually in a way. So I think that does introduce a different dynamic and, you kind of have to get on with them. So you do sort of compromise maybe a little bit and you often get sort of quite close to people in a way because you share an experience together that is so different that really anybody else in the world is experiencing at that moment. And that keeps you quite close. But you are obviously spending time in a tent together, very small enclosed space. And I think you just have to be aware that everybody does need a little bit of time on their own sometimes. And so not always to be, I like talking, so I tend to sort of talk a lot, but sometimes I have to be aware that other people might not really want that, 24/7.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
How long do you spend in a tent on these field expeditions at a time?
Between 6 and 8 weeks normally for the work that I do. Yeah.
That's such a long time. And am I right in thinking that during that period, you can't shower, you don't have access to the facilities that you normally would have? You, of course, don't have any fresh fruit and vegetables. You're just eating dry rations.
Yeah, you definitely can't have a shower. I mean, you can wash. It used to be sort of, I think, traditional that you didn't and you would try and sort of make your clothes fall off you at the end of the season. But that was a kind of male thing to do in the past. Now that we have women, it's like, yeah, I do try to wash like once a week.
Introduced a sense of hygiene.
Yes. And it's funny when you sort of say, oh, well, I'm going to wash, then suddenly it's not sort of so much bravado not to anymore. And everyone else thinks, oh, perhaps I will too. But yeah, it's a bit of an effort. You have to use a couple of flasks of hot water and sort of go off into the kind of little toilet tent that we have and try and sort of flannel yourself down. But it's amazing how you feel afterwards when you put a fresh set of clothes on after, a few weeks of actually usually quite sweaty after a few weeks because I've been climbing mountains and things. It's really a fantastic feeling. And that first shower back on station when you get back from your sort of 8 weeks away is also amazing.
Oh, that's just, It must be such a sense of adaptation. Already coming out of Antarctica from a research station is one thing, but I think coming out of the field from when you're in very confined living, very extreme living with only a couple of people, do you find it's almost quite overwhelming to come back to station because that's a busy environment in itself?
I think usually we're probably sort of looking forward to that. Because, you're looking forward to some proper food and not this dehydrated stuff that we've been mostly eating. Looking forward to talking to someone different, not because you don't get on with the person you're with, but just because you kind of would like to see a few other people. I do thrive on being around people, I think. So it probably wouldn't suit everyone, but I'm always happy to get back to station and also happy to be in the field.
Yeah, I've seen a few hermits come back sometimes from the field on
Yes,
station.
Lots of beards.
They're amazing. Yeah, and even station itself, that's a tiny subsection of society. What about the ship, Matt? Do people get on the ship? Is there any kind of close quarter living conflicts? How is it?
Well, we try to minimise conflicts as much as possible. I've been very lucky, mostly never really seen much in my career with Bass. People understand, working on ships, everyone's in the same mentality that some people need more time away from others than others do. And we have lots of social gatherings, so quiz nights and movie nights, as well as, letting people have some peace as well. There's sort of a mood or a morale level you can tell on the ship quite easily. So if there's a bit of weather, everyone's a bit quieter and just getting on with their jobs. Whenever we've been able to do something like go and see a big iceberg or landing some sea ice for the day, then moods are very high and people are really sociable from that aspect. So yeah, we're all in it together, so to speak.
What role do you take in the crossing the line ceremony?
I've done lots of different roles. Police, and I've been the Queen for a bit, and I was a nurse for once. I don't know why I was that, but yeah, just whatever's going.
So the crossing the line ceremony is when you cross the equator for the first time, that moment when you're at 0 degrees of latitude, essentially, and everyone gets together, and all the new people that have never crossed the equator before are I guess, hunted down by the police and rounded up. They're taken to King Neptune's court and they're given slops from the kitchen. Have you actually had to pour the slops over people's head? Because I think that was the most disgusting experience that I've probably actually ever been part of.
Yeah, we have. Yeah, I've done that. We used to put a lot of yeast in the slops as well, so they'd start to bubble and leave them out on deck.
In the sun. Let's also remember that it's the tropical sun and they're left there, and then almost I remember a lid being taken off a sealed unit and there's like this gas escaping out of it. So right, that's from the yeast. That's really good to know. It's really nice. Really nice. How rough can the seas get when you approach the Southern Ocean?
Yeah, so, roughest seas in the world. Thankfully, we're here in the summer, but it still gets, 10 metre swell, 10, 11 metre swell. We had the storm of 2023, start of March this year. That was coming out of Sydney. It was coming across the Southern Ocean. I was watching it. We had to go quick to try and get around it, but we were still encountering 85 knots. The centre of the storm was sort of 120 knots of wind or whatever. So if we hadn't have left Sydney on time, we would have been pinned there for 3 or 4 days. So we had to just punch through it.
Your role as a captain, you're just constantly having to make these judgment calls, these decisions, watching weather patterns from far and wide, not just the location that you're in, how that might later impact you. Are the facilities available to you quite good in terms of forecasting and storm prediction?
Yeah, so I keep an eye on all the different, there's about 6 different weather models that we look at. When I can get a forecast from Rotherham, if we're in the vicinity, is brilliant. Rotherham forecasting is really good because it's super local. And then the other stuff isn't as highly detailed, so you're not going to get the real nuances that you get at Rotherham, but you can see storms developing across the Southern Ocean and know which bits to avoid, etc. Sometimes doing science, you just have to get on with it. We were doing CTDs across Drake Passage, 3 weeks just sat in Drake's Passage, let the storms roll past you.
Oh, what's a CTD for those that might not know?
No, you're asking me. It's used for taking seawater samples and measuring the physics of the ocean vertically.
Yeah, that's good. It measures the profiles of. It's got lots of sensors, like an instrument that's got lots of sensors. Stands for conductivity, temperature, and depth, and measures a whole variety of different ocean parameters. But cool, that's great. So I guess you have to obviously balance those science priorities as well against extremely bad weather conditions. I mean, 120 knots sounds intense. And how was crossing the Drake's Passage when you went to Rotherham this year?
It was like a mill pond. Unbelievable. Absolutely flat calm. It was fantastic.
That's not always the case.
No, we've had really good weather. A lot of fog this last month. Lots and lots of fog. But the weather's been pretty good. So I think we're definitely in for a battering.
Are you scared? Are you ever scared? Just a little bit?
Scared's not the right word, is it? Because you have to be respectful and know that, if something happens, you have to just take that as it comes. You can't let it. If you start to think about it too much, you probably wouldn't do this job. What are the chances of, if something goes wrong, what are the chances of getting everybody into lifeboats, abandoning, etc.? It's all very high risk for that. So you just take every step as it comes, and everyone looks after each other, and it's basically keep the water out of the ship, and the ship will keep floating. So that's what we would try to do.
Amazing. Joe, let's go to work-life balance. What's your story? How have you got a family? How do you leave your family, if so, for 7 seasons of Antarctica?
Yeah, so I do have 2 children, 2 girls who are 15 and 10 now. And given that I've been working at British Antarctic Survey for 21 years, you can see that some of that time has overlapped with their lives. But the first few seasons I didn't have kids at all when I went. So that was, I did have a husband. I still do. So, yeah, that was a sort of different thing. I think leaving them for the first time when my older daughter at the time, she was 3, it was tough. Yeah, probably tougher for my husband, though. Being left behind, having to deal with all the stuff at home. There is a really nice thing, I think, about going away to somewhere like Antarctica where you don't have all the sort of communications, or you didn't then at least, that you do now. You are able to sort of leave it all behind a little bit. There's not much you can do about what's going on at home. And that is actually quite, as a mother, I think that's really quite relaxing. And it's a relaxation sort of sense of relaxation that you don't often have. So I do find, even though I'm going for work, I do find it quite a sort of restorative, is that the word? Restorative experience doing field work, and I come back and I feel like I can actually be a sort of better mum, I think, somehow. I've got a bit more energy and a bit more, I kind of appreciate the children a bit more after that.
I love that perspective. I think that's really unique. It's almost quite therapeutic.
Yeah.
Being away from everything and then coming back to it.
I mean, I suppose it's like with anything. If you go away from it for a bit, you start to appreciate it more, don't you, when it's not there? But equally, it is quite difficult preparing to leave, I think, especially when they're really little. So the following season, I went on my younger one at the time was 2. So I had, 2 of them quite young, and sort of trying to explain to a 2-year-old how long you're going to be away for and what that sort of means. It's almost impossible. But I do think kids are quite adaptable. So I think they would say that they haven't sort of suffered from it. I hope not. Sometimes it's hard for us leaving them, but I think actually it's a good thing overall.
And now your girls have grown up to an age where they can understand what you're doing. What do they think of their mum going to do Antarctic field work and living in a tent? Do they think you're the coolest person ever? Or do they grasp it?
Well, I think they probably do, but they don't want to say. But they do love it when I go into schools and, I talk to their class about what I've been doing. You can see that my younger one, she's sort of looking all excited and, oh, look at my mum. So, yeah, I guess it's a pretty special job, isn't it? Not many people get to do this. And as you say, not that many women, really. It's increasing now. But, yeah, I'm probably one of the sort of earlier people to do deep field work anyway with a family.
Absolutely. It's incredible. What about the festive period? Because that coincides.
Yes.
The Antarctic field work, the height of summer in the Southern Hemisphere, is, of course, 24 hours of daylight, completely different to what we would have in the Northern Hemisphere. That overlaps with Christmas and New Year.
Yes. And a lot of people say to me, oh, don't you miss Christmas? And because obviously I have been down there, I've actually been 3 times. I've missed 3 Christmases at home. People say, do you miss it? And you do in a sense, but I think when you're down there, you've got a job to do. You're so focused on that in a way, every day is sort of the same. And we do try to celebrate a little bit, But if the weather's good, we won't be staying in the tent to celebrate. We'll be out working because you never know what the weather's going to be like the following day or the following week. So I think probably the family back home miss not having me around. But we usually try to make Easter a bit more of a special time. So when I get back, we'll celebrate that a little bit more and have a proper meal, and almost like Christmas in a sense then. And for me, that's fine. I've kind of got used to that, I think.
Adaptable, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then how would you celebrate the festive period in a tent?
How
do you celebrate?
We try to have some decent food. So, it's always very good for morale anyway to have good food. One time I went recently, we took some duck from the Rotherham research station freezers. And because, of course, it's really cold where we were going, we were able to bury it. So it stayed frozen for sort of the month before we actually needed to eat it on Christmas Day. And then we sort of dug it up. That was like a quite exciting thing. Oh, where is it? Is it still where we put it? We did have a little stick to sort of indicate where it had been buried. Dug it out, and then we cooked that for our Christmas lunch. And I think we had a tin of cherries to make a sort of cherry sauce. It was a bit weird, but it kind of worked.
Sounds
and
quite
I always
French.
take a little Christmas pudding from home, just one of those tiny, tiny ones that you can just heat up in a sort of saucepan, because we have very rudimentary cooking facilities. So it's just like a pan with hot water, and you can kind of boil the plastic thing with the pudding in it in the pan. But it's amazing how good it tastes.
I love that. I think that's really special. Yeah. And then I guess contrast to Christmas and the festive period on the ship, what kind of food are you guys eating? Is it a lot more extravagant to a boiled Christmas pudding in a pot?
Probably.
Yeah, it is. We try to do Christmas roughly around Christmas Day, but operations come first, depending on weather. I think this year, unfortunately, we're going to be in the middle of Drake Passage for Christmas, but that's just how it goes. So hopefully the weather's not too bad. But yeah, the galley work really hard on the ship anyway. And then at Christmas, they work even harder and prep stuff, for a lot longer, and usually go all out. So they really get the creativity going. And yeah, we try to make as big a day of it as we can. We organise Secret Santa. That usually happens in about August.
In August.
So everybody chooses names. Yeah, the trip before. It gives people their leave period to go and make gifts or buy gifts then and fly with them. So we do Secret Santa, nice meal, sometimes a carol service, and then maybe a Christmas movie.
What about the New Year? How do you celebrate that?
So New Year, again, we do it on New Year's Eve, but I think this year I'll probably do it at UK time instead of -3. So it means it's 9 o'clock instead of midnight, just so people don't have to sit up. There's a tradition when ships of old used to change the watch, or there'd be a bell system. That's how people knew what time it was. So the bell would be rung every half hour, up to 8 bells to change a watch. So at midnight is eight strikes of the bell. And to ring in the new year, the youngest person on board or the oldest person on the ship would ring it 4 times, and then the youngest person on board rings it the other 4 times. So the new person rings in the new year. So that's what we'll do on the bridge.
That's such a nice ceremony. And in 24 hours of daylight as well. And do you have a family, Matt?
Yes, I have. I've got 2 girls and a boy, 5, 3, and a newborn. So I'm at the stage of leaving them and trying to explain stuff and how long I'm going to be away and et cetera, et cetera. So it's tough going. And I would echo as well what Joe says. Come to work for a bit of a break. My poor wife, she has to work hard all the time, but it means that when I'm home, I'm full of energy and can give it my all, so to speak.
Matt, do you find that like when you get back, they kind of hand over everything to you suddenly and you're having to do all the nappies and everything?
Immediate handover period. You deal with all this now. Yeah, it's good though. It is good. It's hard leaving. And 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, not fully emotionally developed. So it's just like, Daddy's going now for 3 months. Bye. No emotion whatsoever. And that's heartbreaking. But then the 5-year-old's like really clingy and stuff. So it's an interesting time. And the baby, he's only 4 months, so he'd probably not even remember me. But hey ho, we'll see.
How do you keep in touch with your family when you're on the ship? Like, especially young children, are you able to FaceTime them? Do they understand you at sea?
We can FaceTime at the minute, which it works well. Not that long ago, there was no FaceTime or anything, so it was just WhatsApp calls. Or I remember when I started, it was emails, but didn't have kids at that point. So audio messages as well are nice. They just give me a random chat about what's going on in their lives. It's funny. It keeps you sort of centered a bit as well. You remember that, there's a whole other life happening in the background while I'm down here.
Yeah, a bit like I think I echo that as well. A double life. I almost feel that too. I don't have a family and I don't have kids in the same way, but definitely it is like 2 parallel lives. You get absorbed into this family that you have at a station or on the ship or in the field, and then you come back to your life and it's almost like, oh yeah, there's this whole other set of people that also exist. I think you can almost forget them sometimes, just to be totally honest. Joe, how do you keep in touch with your family in the field? What kind of communication have you got?
Yeah, well, we don't have FaceTime. Well, I mean, I don't think we do. We didn't when I last went, which was just before COVID. So I have to say, I don't find communicating with back home very helpful when I'm in the field. I think it just brings home to both sides how much is missing and what you're missing. And so actually we tend to email now, me and my husband, and he'll put snippets in from the kids. And then I like that because you can sort of read it over and over again. But we don't often talk on the phone. And when you do, you're using a satellite telephone, so that the sound is quite distorted. And I think sometimes you can't recognise the voice. So I've had it that my kids didn't recognise me, which was, quite upsetting in a way when you're such a long way away. So we keep that fairly minimal. I did have one time recently when my husband sort of sent an email and said, oh yeah, my younger daughter, she swallowed a marble. And he just said this in passing. I was like, what? You better do something about that. Oh, really? Is that important? It was rather difficult. I thought, maybe it would have been better if he hadn't told me that. Anyway, that was resolved. But yeah. The communication has changed massively in the time I've been working for British Antarctic Survey. So when I first went down in 2002, it was really basic. We had to send messages over the radio, which would be sort of dictated at Rotherham, the research station, and then I think probably sent, I don't know how, maybe by email to our family. So you could only have a very short amount of text, and of course everybody could hear it in the whole world if they wanted to tune into your radio.
That's on the high frequency radio that you.
Yes.
So you set up an antenna outside of the tent, and then
that's right.
You're communicating from. Well, where's the furthest south that you've been?
Furthest south about -75. Yeah, so 75 south. It's not that far south. Sure, there's a lot of Antarctica that's further south than where I've been because I'm mostly around the coastal areas. But it does feel a long way away, and sometimes it's difficult to get the communications going well. So sometimes if the weather's not good, it can be very crackly, difficult to hear people. And you were talking about New Year. We had one New Year where we got all the field parties to sort of talk to each other at once at New Year's Eve, and that was really quite special because, different people in different places, some a very long way away, but all isolated in their own little bit. Yes. We were very excited to talk to each other.
That happened as well, the New Year that's just been, and all the field parties that were like on the Ellsworth Mountains and Fossil Bluff at Sky Blue, different Antarctic field depots, I guess. They could be called the petrol stations of Antarctica. Yeah. They were all speaking to each other. I think Hallie as well got involved on the HF. Yeah. And it was so cool. I was in the tower at Rotherham listening to their conversations. It's amazing having that kind of level of communication.
When I started, my family, my dad, not really understanding things, would text me or email him and say, "Can you ring me now?" ! So obviously that's jump straight into emergency, and it's just that I got some post or something. So they had to be warned that no, if you say that, that's like alarm bells going off. Stop the ship.
Stop the ship. Jay, what about you? Any significant home crises that come to mind?
Anything apart from the marble. That was one. I did have to leave. I remember the day I was going and my daughter came out in spots for chicken pox. I was like, oh no. And we knew, how it might be coming because there was a children in the nursery who were getting it and so on. But I thought, she managed just about to avoid it. And then literally the day I was going, oh, there's a spot. And I felt so bad going really, but she was okay. But,
just that constant worry.
You can't change when you're going, because there might be a ship waiting to take you down there or a flight. And you have to just, unless you're ill or something yourself, you obviously have to go. So I was like, well, just, phone a friend. My husband, I have to say, credit to him, he's absolutely brilliant. He just gets on with it, and he's done some really long time. 3 months, I think I was away, and he had a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old or whatever at the time. So it's quite a lot going on.
Kudos to the partners, I think. Yeah, really.
And the wider community, the family and friends who also chip in to help out. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, of course. What kind of science are you doing at the moment, Matt? On what projects are you supporting?
We're currently just finishing off one called Biopole, which is looking at carbon uptake under the ice, effectively. So how, when the ice breaks up, how much carbon's taken up by the wee beasties in the water as that breaks up. So the plan was to go in deep in 9/10, 10/10 of fresh ice and sample on the way in and then sample on the way out. So CTDs and biosampling as well.
That's great. Do you get to be involved much with the scientists?
As much as you want to. There's a lot of call for volunteers to filter seawater over the last week. So lots of people have been learning how to filter seawater.
Have you? Because that
no,
is
I'm very busy, unfortunately.
Dull job.
I can't be filtering seawater. Too busy.
That's a rubbish excuse. Joe, what about you? What work do you do when you're back in Cambridge?
Well, mostly sitting at a computer. It's nothing very exciting or glamorous, I'm afraid. But yeah, sort of generally kind of going through data sets that we've created from rock samples. So, I'll collect rock samples from the field and then usually I end up sending them off these days to other labs. I used to do the lab work myself, getting a whole load of numbers back, depending on what we're doing. And then obviously there's a lot of sort of crunching of those numbers and trying to figure out what they mean, which is really interesting. And talking to lots of other scientists as well to sort of get their ideas and thoughts. It's very collaborative. So yeah, it's fun. And I've been working mostly over the last few years on a really big project that's part of a very large multi-discipline and also multi-international research programme, which is looking at this part of the West Antarctic ice sheet where Thwaites Glacier and Pine Island Glacier are. They're changing massively at the present day. We're quite concerned that they are going to, in future, melt very fast and contribute a lot and quickly to rising sea levels. And obviously this is a really big threat to humanity potentially. So at the moment that area is contributing more than 10% of the global sea level rise. So it's a really critical place to be looking at and trying to understand better. And I feel like that's kind of really urgent right now as well. And we're sort of at crunch time with lots of decisions having to be made about, where we're going in the future and whether we can kind of curb those rising global temperatures that we're hearing about every day in the news.
Such crucial work. And Matt, on a similar theme, do you feel a sense of importance contributing towards these science projects that are having huge societal impacts and changes in policy?
Yes. Simple answer, yes. We're here to support science, and we're here to do as much as we possibly can and support as many science projects as we can. That's, either doing field inputs or getting the gear to Rothera that we need, or doing, oceanography as we go. Most people on board, I would say, are working on the ship specifically because of the work we do and the science that we support. And it feeds into the global picture of the climate and the state of affairs of the planet.
And Jo, have you got any final thoughts, any messages for people at home?
Well, I suppose I would say, we know a lot about Antarctica, but there's also so much still to know. And I know that sounds like I'm trying to make a job for myself, but, I'm not really. It's just the more we find out about some of these major glaciers and how they're changing, the more we realise that the system is quite complicated and there's actually a lot more to it. So, and again, like I said earlier, there's places that I'm going to that nobody's been or not for a very long time. And now we've got like new techniques and things. We can do new things and really try to understand how things are now, and it was not the same as it was a few decades ago because a lot is changing in Antarctica too. So I guess there's a lot still to do. So we've got a lot of work ahead.
Absolutely. Matt, what about you?
Yeah, I would echo that. From a ship point of view, this new big ship is more capable than the others were. We can go deeper and longer and support more complicated science on board, and there's always more to do and find out, as Jo said. So yeah, there's plenty to do.
Matt Neill at sea, Jo Johnson here in Cambridge. Thank you both so much. Do check out the Beyond the Ice blog on the British Antarctic Survey website, and my podcast too, ICEWORLD Podcast. I'm Nadia Frontier, and I've been your host today. Thanks for listening, and thank you to my amazing guests.